To be FA or not to be FA? That is the question. My name is Kent, and this is your half-hour call.
And folks, this is your half-hour call. Half-hour call. The call is now half hour, please.
Alrighty, friends, we are back with another episode of Half Hour Call. If you ask 100 different stage managers how they got to the point of becoming a stage manager, you'll probably get 100 different answers. Well, I didn't get to talk to 100 people, but today I caught up with 4 different stage managers who all had completely unique paths from their college experience to where they are today. And stick around till the end of the video where we'll talk about the advice that these stage managers have for people as they forge their own path in this industry. Let's watch. Today I'm joined by some wonderful guests who are going to talk to us all about their different college experiences and how it's helped them in the professional world. So for each of my lovely panelists, if you guys could please introduce yourselves and give us a little bit of your schooling background and then where you are now.
My name is Zoe Branson. I'm a recent graduate from Western Carolina University. I graduated as of December in 2019. And currently I'm unemployed due to the pandemic, but I was supposed to be on a ship with Royal Caribbean cross-training to be a stage manager with them.
I am Gavin Yehle, and I graduated May of 2019 from the University of Utah with a BFA in both acting and stage management, and I currently live in Seattle, Washington, and just finished stage managing a online show.
My name is Hunter Lewis. I am a recent graduate of Columbus State University. I just graduated in May, and I'm still currently located in Columbus, Georgia.
And hi, my name is Sean Patrick. I'm not so recent of a graduate. I actually left college after 2 years back in 2001 as an acting major, who then transitioned to stage management after several years of performing. Living in New York City currently, and most recently was on the national tour of the band's visit in the stage management department.
Awesome. I'm so excited to get to talk to you guys. There's an amazing breadth of different experiences in educational settings, which is so cool. I actually have a BFA in musical theater, and then only took like 2 stage management classes and then just dove in and had on-the-job training. So I'm curious, at what point in your either education or your career did you realize that stage management was something that you wanted to do?
I auditioned for a show for the University of Utah Youth Theater, and I ended up not being able to do it because I had a conflict on opening night, but the director of the show still offered for me to be a part of the show, and I showed up at rehearsals and sort of ended up giving myself the job of stage manager and learned sort of by fire on the job and had a few coaching sessions from her. And so I kind of fell into it in a way.
I started off, like I said, as a performer. I always loved stage management. When I was a kid doing youth theater, I used to always stand by and watch the stage managers call the show, and I just thought it was the coolest thing because I had no idea what they were actually doing, but it just seemed really cool because I got to wear a headset. And then as I got into college more, I went, oh, this is what stage managers actually do. I left school after 2 years as a performance major for musical theater to book some professional opportunities, which was awesome. And then I started stage managing just through a couple friends for smaller theater companies back home, non-union. And then I got my union card as an actor. And then the very next year, I got offered a job PSMing for a Lort B theater. And I thought, oh, I don't know what this is, but okay. So I kind of dove in feet first and just took what I remembered and made a lot of mistakes along the way, but learned quickly and found that I really, really loved this new discovery I made and decided to make that my new career path. And it's been consistent ever since 2007, 2008.
That's awesome. That's the trial by fireiest I've ever heard of someone.
To say the least.
I started like baby stage management, I like to call it, in middle school and high school. And then I got into college, and I stayed undeclared for my first year. I kind of knew I wanted to get into theater. And then I declared my sophomore year, had my first show with the school as an ASM for sort of a dance recital kind of deal with all of the dance classes. So it was a smaller show in compared to the main stage shows. So I was ASM for that. But also in the trial by fire theme, my stage manager like dropped out of the blue. I was on my way to a meeting and I got a text. I texted her like, "Hey, are you gonna be at the thing at 11?" And she goes, "What?" And then just says sorry. And I didn't find out until I got to the meeting that she wasn't gonna be there. But it all worked out, in the end. I ended up being the stage manager and thrown into that show that had like a week to prepare. And ever since that, I just kind of fell into a groove of it, of really enjoying that job and the chaos that comes along with it.
So I actually took a gap year after high school because I was gonna pursue music, basically stage management for bands. But I still thought I wanted to do music. But it was during the summer before I was going to start my fall semester, and I just decided that music wasn't for me. This wasn't what I wanted to do. So I was going to take the year and like kind of figure out. But by just knowing people, I landed a job at a children's theater company in my hometown, and they hired me as their like stage manager. They never had a stage manager before, so I was just kind of their like organization person essentially, with the title stage manager. And that's when I decided that I wanted to pursue that as a career.
Amazing. I love the commonality of trial by fire. That seems to be if you can stay cool under pressure, it seems like you might make it in this career path, which is 100%. Awesome.
Yeah.
So how did you arrive at the path that you took, and what were the factors when you were selecting programs? What were the factors that made you want to pursue that specific program at that specific school?
I mean, mine's probably the most boring, because I grew up in Salt Lake City, and I grew up going to the youth theater program that was affiliated with the University of Utah, and a lot of the people who come out of the University of Utah youth theater program go into the acting program at the University of Utah. So I kind of ended up sort of being funneled through that path. But also my mom works for the University of Utah, and it's an in-state school, so I got in-state tuition and then half tuition because my mom works there. And it's a BFA program. So I was just kind of like, well, I'll just do this.
That's the dream right there. Half off of tuition. Yeah. That is the dream.
Oh gosh. So I kind of arrived at mine. Like I said, I stayed my first year in college undeclared. I kind of did it on purpose so that I could get into school and get away from my parents and learn kind of like who I was and what I wanted to do, and if theater was still like the top of that list. And declared in my sophomore year. And the thing about Western Carolina is they have a BFA in acting, a BFA in musical theater. They have a new BFA program called EDT. It stands for Entertainment Design and Technology. And then there's a BA in general theater. And I had taken the BA in general theater. I chose to do that. And the EDT major came in during like my second year in the program, so I could have switched. And a lot of my stage manager friends, they did switch, and my design friends, they switched and all that. But I stayed in the BA program to kind of keep my options open as far as classes and training, and really experience as much as I could in the college setting before I went out into the professional world where like a lot of that wouldn't have been possible.
I was auditioning for schools back in the late 90s, 1999, when I was doing auditions, and musical theater hadn't quite hit its peak of, I guess, trendiness for students to audition. We're pre-Glee at this point. And it was interesting because I found a lot of schools actually, their theater programs would send you acceptances before the universities would necessarily accept you. So I got into some really great programs and then didn't get into the schools because I did no work in high school, but I tested really well on my SATs. I was lazy and smart, which is a bad combination. I just hated school. So schools were like, cool, you don't put any effort in, so no. And then I got rejected. But I did, however, get into two great schools in Ohio, Otterbein University and Wright State, both of which had very strong musical theater programs. I evaluated them. I spent my time at both, and Wright State was the state school, so I got the in-state tuition. So, and they had Dr. Pepper, which Otterbein did not, and that was very important to me. So, my college was selected by my caffeine addiction. And it was a BFA program for musical theater, which I knew I wanted because I wanted the more conservatory style training. And that was definitely the right choice for me at the time, I think.
So I, because I took my gap year, I kind of felt like I had to rush into choosing a college because I had heard so many people say, like, if you take a gap year and you don't go back after that first year, you're never going to go back to school. And I knew school was something I wanted to continue. And so I found Columbus State just researching. And I think to my knowledge, they were the only school in the state of Georgia that offered a BFA in design technology, and I knew I didn't want to pursue a BA because I knew that meant acting classes, and I am absolutely not an actor. So I decided to go into the BFA program, which I think we'll get into this in a little bit later, but they only had one stage management class, and it was very much design oriented, which I was also not much of a designer in the beginning. But because it was not acting, that's kind of why I chose that program.
So you didn't have to take any acting classes in your BFA musical theater, or not musical theater. What is it? Stage management? Those are the words. There we go.
Yeah. There was one, everybody had to take an introductory, intro to acting class their freshman year. And it was absolutely mortifying. And then never again did we have to take another class if we didn't want to.
So in those programs, what kind of stage management training did you get? How extensive was it? And how much, I guess, on the job training or productions during school did you get to participate in?
As part of the requirements for my BFA, we had to stage manage or ASM 6 different shows in order to graduate. And there's like direct mentorship throughout all of those. And I mean, it's not like the professor comes into every single rehearsal and like watches you call breaks and like take down blocking, but like they're there for all of tech, and you do weekly check-ins and have weekly meetings, and they'll look at your paperwork and make sure that you're doing a good job and like feel like you have a supported network of assistants, or if you are an assistant, feel like you're, learning from the show. And a lot of it is like directly tied to a show and like learning by doing. You do have to take an intro to stage management class to start out with, and then there are other advanced stage management classes that you can choose from different options of like what type of advanced stage management class you want to take. So there's like one about unions, and there's one about like, I don't even remember. These got added after as I was leaving. So I kind of got an amalgamation of a bunch of them. So I really like the mix of like in class, like lecture style, like this is what opera looks like, and here's a who, what, where, and like this is what musical theater looks like, and here is a run sheet, and like some of the differences between those in a lecture style in conjunction with the like on the job, like you are actually stage managing and like following you throughout that and getting direct mentorship. But also like being able to choose like, oh, I want to be able to do an opera, and having a music department that you can work on operas, or like I want to do a Shakespeare, or I want to do a musical, and being able to have some of that choice within the program was also really nice.
We had kind of similar program where it's more of a you're working on productions and that's your training. We have the one like intro to stage management class that's taught by our production manager, and after that they try to start you as an ASM on a show and work you into it at our school. But it is a lot of like, you're working on a production now, and that's your that's your training, where our production manager will keep up with, making sure that you're getting your reports out on time and you're doing your agendas for your production meetings. And he's really good at like tweaking little things and letting you know, like, hey, this will be more efficient if you do it this way, and facilitating communication.
Mine was got this much training in stage management at college. I didn't take a single stage management course. I remember watching stage managers and thinking, oh, that's cool. Including someone who, when I was a sophomore, was a freshman stage manager, who then went on to, and I think still is, the PSM of, or well, was, because they closed, the PSM of Hamilton and Chicago. So I had apparently some pretty decent mentors that I didn't know I had at the time. But then, oddly enough, I went back to my alma mater, having never studied stage management there, and having dropped out after 2 years. I went back to be a guest lecturer in their stage management program, which the TD who was
That's
there
great.
did not know who I was, did not know my history, and was like, Sean was one of our great stage management grads. I was like, sure I was.
That's hysterical. Oh my goodness. So when I take it most of your training was then on the job. How did you kind of learn the ropes, other than what was your kind of thought process when you first started doing it?
I loved to shadow. I was lucky that I grew up in Cleveland, and Cleveland has actually I think it does have the nation's largest subscription series for Broadway tours. It's between that and Denver, I'm almost positive. And the great part about that was they have 4 Broadway-sized touring houses in one complex. So there were always 1 or 2 tours at the same time. So I could almost always drop by the stage door, and I worked for Playhouse Square, which was the housing entity. So I was able to stop by frequently. They all knew me, and say, hey, I'd love to shadow, and leave my information at the stage door. So I got to shadow a lot of Broadway touring stage managers, which was very helpful. And I read a lot of books, just because I thought it was fascinating, and it's the only kind of book I found I liked to read, weirdly enough. So I read a ton of how-to stage manage books. And then once I got the opportunity to actually put that into practice, that's when I found myself either sinking or swimming. And when I felt like I was sinking, I would reach out to colleagues who I'd met through tours, who I had just been networked with in other ways, and just said, okay, I'm drowning, help me, what should I do? As opposed to trying to fudge my way through it, which I knew could have caused more damage in the end than just actually getting a good answer or good advice. So that's how I learned, and I'm still learning to this day, and I'll be 40 next year, and I'm ready to keep learning.
We only had one stage management class, and everybody in the department had to take it, and part of that class was lecture style, but also you had to, depending on the semester, because we had a one-act festival in the spring semester every year, so if you took it in the spring semester, you regardless of what semester, you were assigned an ASM position to either a main stage show at Columbus State, or we had a partnership with the neighboring theater, Springer Opera House. People would be sent over there to be ASMs, or if you took it in the spring and it was one act season, and if you really, really wanting to be a stage manager, that's usually when you took it and you were assigned to stage manage a one act festival show. And so that's the course that I took. But after that, once you take the stage management class, that's it. The stage managers apply for shows. You send in your resume, you mark off what shows you want to do. If you get something, great. If you don't, you just have to live with that. We didn't have any sort of mentorship. Like, nobody was ever looking over your shoulder or checking in on you. Kind of like Gavin said, which I kind of wish they had, because I think that would have been helpful, especially for the as an underclassman in undergrad. That would have been very helpful. But it was kind of just, if you got a show, go and learn and do it by yourself. And if you sink, then you know better for next time. And if you succeed, then that's great, and keep doing that, I guess.
Wow, that kind of stresses me out hearing about it. Trying to learn by just then saying, go be a stage manager. Have fun. That's
Oh yeah, it was stressful.
Wow. With all of these various different educational paths, what was it like when you were trying to find your first few jobs outside of school, or for summer internships or something like that? How did it affect or help you to get those jobs?
I feel pretty lucky in that sense, because my professor, Amber, came in to teach halfway through my time at the University of Utah, but she came from Seattle. And that was probably the biggest impetus for me to actually move here. Because she knew a lot of people, and she ended up connecting me with a lot of people up here. And the fall, right before I graduated, I actually came to Seattle with her and was able to shadow a bunch of shows in Seattle and meet a bunch of people, and be able to kind of start a network before I even considered moving. And then after I graduated, she ended up connecting me with like some Facebook groups in Seattle and adding me into like the Seattle Stage Managers Facebook group, which is where I actually got my first job in Seattle. And through her recommendations, as well as her helping connect me in Seattle, I was able to sort of jumpstart my career with somewhat already built up network that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
For me, college was an incredible networking advantage because I had these professors that have all been working professionally for 20, 30 years, and they know people all over the country, and they're looking out for you. So I had quite a few professors that, like the Facebook groups, they would go on, and as soon as they knew about a job that a theater they used to work at needed filled, they would go on Facebook and they'd type up a post and go, "Hey, does anyone need a summer job this year? They're looking for a stage manager. They're looking for," and that's how I got my first professional job. Was one of my professors, Dustin Whitehead, who did a couple of my acting classes. He posted on Facebook and was like, "Hey, this theater I used to work at in Maine, they're looking for somebody." And one thing led to another, and I had an interview, and next thing I knew, I was driving 20 hours up to Maine by myself to go work there for a few months.
Yeah, mine was a little different because when I got back to Cleveland after I left college, I did some work, moved back to Cleveland for a bit, and I found that some friends of mine that were directors just approached me about stage managing projects at some local theaters that were professional companies, but not necessarily union. They would use a couple equity guest artist contracts. So they paid. It was not great money, but it was fine. But they trusted me in a lot of different settings. It was a couple large musicals, a couple small plays. Got to work at a few different venues, different styles of working with different TDs, different production teams. And then I moved back to New York, or actually moved to New York. That was when I moved to New York for the first time. Moved to New York in 2008 to pursue acting again, just to see. And then within 2 months of moving here, I got an offer to do a show at Virginia Musical Theater, to PSM it. So I went down there and I ended up doing 4 shows back to back. 3 shows? 3 shows, that's a lie. 3 shows back to back at VMT. And I just kept weirdly getting recommended by people that were friends of friends who had never necessarily worked with me, but just were giving my name out. And I thought, oh, okay. So I was lucky that I was able to keep booking work. And then the theater company in Cleveland that I mentioned, so Lort B, was a company I had worked for as an actor. It was originally a Shakespeare company, which is now a more diverse breed. It's the theater that Tom Hanks actually started off at, called Great Lakes Theater. That's where he got his equity card. And it's a great theater company. And I was in their Christmas Carol for 2 years. I did a couple other shows. And then they offered me a PSM job in their rotating rep. So I was a PSM in Cleveland at Great Lakes. Then I would go out to the summer to Boise, Idaho for Idaho Shakespeare Festival. And then they also had a partnership with Tahoe Shakespeare Festival. And they would rotate their shows year round. So you had 52 weeks of employment a year. It was crazy, the amount of work that you got from it. So that was kind of my first big thing that made me go, all right, I can do this. I know I can do this. Because no one died. Nothing caught on fire. At least the things that weren't supposed to didn't. The things that were supposed to did. So that was good. And I just kept on plugging. And at the end of that time, right as I was about to move up here, the national tour of Anything Goes was teching in Cleveland, the first national company. And my friend who worked at Playhouse Square, the large industry complex where I used to work, she said, hey, they need a PA for stage management. Would you be interested? And I said, okay, sure. To this point in my life, I had never ASM'd and I'd never PA'd. I had always been a PSM.
Wow.
Was great. To this day, I've still only ASM 3 times, which is weird. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about it exactly. I'm grateful for what I've gotten, but also I'd like to ASM a little bit more. That being said, so I took this PA gig and I hit it off really well with the PSM. He and I got to be really good friends and that whole team, which then led to other tours, meeting other people, networking more in New York, which then built my resume from there. But I took a slightly different path. I didn't have any school connections, unfortunately, to help me get there. So that was...
But
Yeah,
you're one
but
of
that's the
their
crazy part.
proudest
Yeah.
stage management graduates.
Yeah. Congrats on graduation.
My first professional job was by just knowing somebody. It was actually, I worked professionally consistently my last 2 years of undergrad. There was a student who I was a friend with, who I had worked on shows before. He had just graduated, and he knew somebody who was a local who was moving back into town, and he needed a stage manager. He was working on this new work. He was just trying to see what it, feel it out, and he needed somebody to just kind of help him. So they sent an email to the stage managers in the department, and I was like, well, I'm not doing anything right now, so let me just go meet with this guy. And it turned out I met with him. He basically gave me the job as soon as I sat down. And we did a 50-minute, basically small version of Romeo and Juliet, all modern. It was set to music. It was really very interesting. And so that was my first professional job. And after that, him and his friend started a company at the end of my junior year, going into my senior year. And they hired me to be their production stage manager. That's what I did all of my last year in undergrad. On top of stage managing at my university, I was also production stage managing with this new company, just because I knew somebody who knew somebody.
It's so funny how fast this industry moves, normally, how fast this industry normally moves, where it's suddenly you're getting a call and 2 days later you need to be somewhere halfway across the country. And so what did you like about your path to stage managing professionally? How do you feel what ways do you think it gave you that edge to kind of really feel confident in what you're doing?
Because mine was very unorthodox, for me at least, I think that actually gave me an edge. Because what I found was I didn't know the rules. I didn't know the boundaries I was supposed to play in. So there were no rules. I made them up as I went, and I made mistakes, like I said, but I learned. So I knew the basics enough, but I'd never had that one approach that was taught that this is the way it is done. Instead, it was, here's the task that needs to be accomplished, figure out how to get there, which I kind of liked. And I found that that's made me very adaptable to a lot of situations. I don't feel like I've ever been stuck in a mentality of how I have to do it or I'm supposed to do it. I adapt my process to every project to make it the most effective for that team, that project, that process.
A lot of that resonated with the way I like to work as well. Did you find that working as an actor with good stage managers as your stage managers then helped you flip it to be like, oh, this is what I want when I'm an actor, so this is what I should do?
It's funny. It's one of the things that even people in my union who have been in the union for 10, 20, 30 years forget, I don't know if it's actively or passively, forget that stage managers are represented by the same union. So one of the things that I always found was the relationship I built with casts as a cast member to my stage manager or as a stage manager to my cast is crucial to the well-being of the show, especially at a certain level when you really are maintaining the show and overseeing the show. That relationship has to be strong. It has to be dynamic. It has to be ever evolving. And it has to be a living relationship. It can't ever stagnate or become static. So I really try and find that the way I behaved as an actor and the things I learned on that side of the table have to translate to how I now do my job. And it also translates to how I relate to designers and creatives.
Yeah.
And who would have thought that a union called Actors Equity Association would be representing stage managers? It's right there in the title, right? It's
magical. Stage manager with a capital A.
As far as getting into professional stage managing, I knew even when I started in school that there were things I didn't know that I needed to know if I was going to be able to talk about it. And because that's 90% of my job is talking to people about everything that goes on in a theater, how am I going to talk to a sound designer if I don't know the first thing about sound design, or an ME or an actor if I don't know what's going through their head at one point? That's why I really appreciated the BA program and the opportunity to take more acting classes, even though I knew 100% there's no way I'm ever getting on a stage. Like, I will admit, I was not good. Like, I was not good in those classes. I'm never going to be on a stage, and that's fine. But I took classes like stage movement and the acting one course that we had to take. And that really helped me connect with the cast members that I worked with a lot, because we were at school doing productions together. But it also put me in their shoes, like literally.
Because I did also major in acting, and that definitely gave me a different insight and into like all of the other people who go through BFAs, even going out into professional jobs after graduating, gives me more of an understanding for all of that. And like, you know, being able to talk to actors when you're on lunch or before or after a rehearsal about, you know, whatever, Linklater or Meisner, or, you know, some weird thing that you might have done in some weird acting class. It gives you another way to connect with people. And beyond that, also, one of the things I really liked about my program, my BFA program, as well as the University of Utah, is that they do require you to take every single design area class, at least the first level. So you have to take sound 1, set 1, costumes 1, whatever, stage makeup, directing 1, like all of the base levels, so that you can have sort of a basic understanding and be able to have conversations with those people. But being able to be in a program that then did give you the ability to do as much as you could or wanted, I think was a big advantage for me. And being able to say, oh yes, I have been a lighting designer for a show. Oh yes, I have been a sound designer for a show. Yes, I have acted in a show. Yes, I have been an assistant production manager. I appreciate the opportunities that I was able to have at the university, but also like taking the initiative to like actually go out and do them.
And tagging off of that directly, if you ever want to tour as a stage manager in any way, learn how to focus. Because I don't think enough people realize that on tours, the stage managers are the ones focusing on load-in days with the lighting department. It's not the electricians that focus, the stage managers that focus. So I think that's super important to know. And if you don't know how to focus and read a focus chart, you should learn that.
Completely agree with basically every point that everybody brought up. Because I personally, for me, the best part of stage management to me is getting to make those connections and relationships with the people in your production team and the people in your cast. Because especially as a college student, I think a lot of people struggle with the aspect of being friends with the people that you're working with, especially actors, because all of my social groups I had maybe 1 or 2 friends that were stage managers, but all of my friends were actors. And so it was really a really important skill for me to learn to, like, when we're doing shows together, like there's like more times than not we are being friends, we're hanging out, but when in the room, like, there was a completely different switch, and it was great because a lot, like, everybody I worked with understood that, and we both respected each other. And I think that, that always helps a rehearsal process, when you know that after this we can go be friends, we can go hang out, but right now there's a certain dynamic between us that we both need to respect from each other. And from my university, because I mentioned before that there was only just one stage management class, and my program was designed specifically for design, you had to take at least 2 from like lights, costume, set, and sound. And I focused primarily on lighting and sound. And I honestly think I did a lot of probably more designing than I ever did stage managing. And especially with props was another big department that we could focus on. That was my main area. But being able to get in there and understand what it takes to be a designer, and then on the next project switch hats and understand what the designers are going through from a stage manager standpoint, that was always something that I really appreciated about the department and about the way that they worked, because we got those opportunities to understand each other, where each other was coming from, and still be able to do our own unique jobs at the same time.
My stage management professor and mentor said, like, this is still one industry where no one actually cares what degree you get. It's all about the training that you get in the path of obtaining that degree. And I feel like everyone's answers just now, since even though we've all come from these such different places, we've all said, like, the most valuable part is the training that we've gotten along the way and the experiences that you've gotten in every single department, which is so important. But what were some of the challenges that you experienced specifically in your unique path that might have been different than some of the other things that you're hearing?
At my university, until the end of my sophomore year, they didn't let you get 2 BFAs. And so I was in the acting program, and hadn't added stage management, but the stage management teacher kept trying to get me to join, and I was like, I don't really want to switch. And so I'd taken a couple of classes, but then dealing with they finally added it at the end of my sophomore year, where the university let you have a double emphasis in a theater BFA. And so trying to deal with that, and getting all of the university bureaucracy was a whole different level. But at the end of the day, I think none of that matters even remotely when it comes down to me wanting to follow my path that I wanted to get out of the university.
I have a note here that my first challenge, and one that I still experience, is confidence. Is you have to be a voice in the room, and being able to find your voice and put it out there and be confident in what you're saying, and that what you're saying is what needs to be done. That can be a lot harder to find when you're saying that to a professor, or you're saying that to one of your friends. Whether it goes either way, you're putting yourself out there. It's always a new challenge, when I go into a new theater, of now, these are new people that have been here longer than I have, and they're asking me to tell them what to do. And finding that balance of, learning a new theater, learning how they do things, how they want their shows run and their rehearsals run. It's always a bit of a learning curve, but, just having that confidence in yourself and knowing that your past experiences have given you the proper training, the proper understanding to be able to tackle this new experience.
I'm going to tag off of that also and say yes. And one of the biggest things for me, kind of going directly along with that, is the idea of self-advocacy. One thing that I find is that because the term stage management doesn't have a concrete definition, it's every job description. If you ask 20 different theaters to write a description of what their stage manager does, you're going to get 20 different answers. Mm-hmm. And it got to a point, and this is strictly speaking for having done this for years, it got to a point where I finally said, okay, what do I need to learn how to say no to? What do I need to learn how to say that's actually not my job? And I'm happy to do that for an additional rider and additional compensation, because otherwise I'm giving you permission to then let the next stage manager do that, and to continue this expectation that stage managers do this when really they never do that. That's just something that they've kind of gotten into a habit of at your theater. So self-advocacy and learning to say no was a big thing, but always doing it in a way that is not rude, dismissive, trying to find that perfect balance, which doesn't always exist, but trying. There were really 3 things. That what am I was another thing for me, which is I've done a lot in my life just out of necessity because I didn't really want to wait tables. I've done it and it's lovely, but also I've been a lighting designer. I've been a sound designer. I've been a production manager. I've production managed Fiddler in Yiddish here off Broadway that Joel Gray directed. So I've gotten some of these big projects, which are cool, but I've never done work at that level before. But because I've done a lot of these things, sometimes people look at me and go, yeah, but what do you do? And I kind of have to take a step back and go, I'm a theater artist, I'm a stage manager, but I do other things. And people's brains kind of explode because in this industry, especially when you get into New York, you get pigeonholed. You are this thing. And if you don't fit that thing, they don't know what to do with you. It's like, wait, what? You're not just this? So being okay with that was a large thing for me, figuring out who I am and how I'm okay with that. And then the last thing was regional theater versus commercial theater, which is something I don't think colleges teach very often. From my experience talking to people, it's if I knew half the things I knew about commercial theater going into it, I would have felt so much better. I didn't know that, for example, as a stage manager, I was never going to be running a production meeting, that would actually be the production manager or the production coordinator, and that I probably wouldn't even be at some of them until we got to tech. Those all happened out of my control, or it'd be a bunch of phone calls that would just be independent catch-ups. If I knew that I was never allowed to touch a prop once we got into a theater, that I couldn't hand anyone anything, that when someone broke something backstage, I couldn't grab a broom and sweep it up because IATSE would freak out and say that's their job. And that, we got to an orchestra pit. When we got to an orchestra rehearsal, that it was the props department that was setting up the pit. I was like, wait, props is doing that? And they're like, yeah, props sets up the pit. I'm like, oh, okay. What? All of these differences between regional and commercial theater were so different, and I wish I would have known those, so I didn't feel like I was really getting a second baptism by fire, thinking I knew what I was doing and then realizing I knew nothing that I was doing when I got into it.
Before we get too far away from it, I wanted to highlight something that Sean said. I wanted to specifically, when you were talking about advocating for yourself and the importance of making sure you're aware of when you're taking on extra duties and all of that, that it's not just advocating for yourself, it's advocating for everyone that comes after you. You said that, but I wanted to really drive that point home because it's so important that, yeah, you might be okay with running the board, but the next person is now going to be expected to do that.
When you're asked to do things like that, I find it so important that I always find the polite way of saying, happy to do it, thank you for the compensation. Just to be clear, I'm not a technician. So if the board freaks out, I'm not going to be the one who's going to be able to necessarily save your show. That's not what I'm trained to do. That's not what I do. Because I find too often they're like, well, you're the board op, you can fix it. It's like, no, I know how to turn the board on, I know how to run a dimmer check, and I know how to make the cues happen. I actually do know a bit more than that, but I'm not going to tell them that because
they didn't pay for that part of your resume.
Exactly. So I make it clear that I will do what I'm asked to do, and I'm happy to do it, but don't expect me to also have this whole other skill set that I may or may not have. So that's important. Right. And continuing on to the legacy of future stage managers in that institution, of course.
The biggest challenge, I think, going off of what Zoe and Sean said was, and there's a specific term for this, and I cannot for the life of me think of it, but when you go through so many rehearsal, like in production processes, and you know you can do it, but every time a new opportunity presents itself, you suddenly start doubting yourself. You're like, well, what if I was just faking it last time? Like, what if that was just an accident that it went right? I struggled with that.
Imposter syndrome.
Thank you. Oh my God. Exactly. Yes. Thank you. I struggle with imposter syndrome. I mean, every single new production I take on, it's regardless of how well the last thing went, how well the last, 5-10 things went, this next thing I automatically assume, well, I don't know how to do this, so I can't do it, so why would I accept it? I struggle with that a lot, and I think a lot of new and young stage managers struggle with that. That was my biggest challenge going throughout college and starting this professional career very, very early on, like still in undergrad, just constantly doubting myself, even though I had books and I had shows behind me that said, hey, you did this before, you can definitely do it again. But that little voice in the back of your head saying, no, that was just pretend, like that was just an accident. So that was the biggest challenge for me, is like learning to trust myself that like if I did it 10 times before, I can probably do it once more.
Other than everything that we've already talked about, what advice do you have for future stage managers that might want to forge their own path, especially since we have so many different paths here? Deciding how they want to enter the workforce, how would you suggest they make the decision?
I mean, I know so many people that have so many different paths that are all working as stage managers. I mean, case in point, all 4 of us here, 5 of us here, I mean, have had completely different paths, and yet here we all are. And so I think ultimately at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't really matter what path you take as long as you're passionate about it and you want to like keep working and keep meeting people and just like keep having that like hunger to, you know, do what we do because it's awesome. Um, but like, I, it doesn't, I don't know. When I was looking at college programs and like when I was in college, I thought it was so important, like, you know, what classes I took and what shows I did and what program I was in and what degree I got and what school it was from and all of this stuff. And it doesn't really matter. What matters is how, like your work ethic and your attitude when you go to work and the network that you have. I think that school most benefited me in the network that it created for me, more so than the like classes themselves. Yes, I learned how to write a report and I learned how to take blocking and all of the like minutia of stage management. But ultimately, you can learn all of that minutia in so many different ways, in so many different places, whether it's on like trial by fire or from a book or from a podcast or a YouTube series or whatever. Like you can find that information wherever, but ultimately it's, I think, more about your ethic and the network that you create.
A friend of mine who's a lawyer, when he had left law school, he said that being a lawyer isn't what they taught him in college. They taught him law. They taught him legalities. He had no idea how to practice that. That he had to figure out once he got out of school. And I think that's what college does very well, is it lays a great foundation. And I'm not saying all programs. I'm saying some programs don't necessarily then take it the next step, which is how do you put this into practice out of this university bubble? And so, do I think you need a college program to be a successful SM? No. However, I do think if you're going to be a successful SM, you need to start familiarizing yourself with every department in production. You need to do your research on what a stage manager does, what makes them good, what makes them not great. I will always say that working on shows that are disasters and terrible are as much of a learning experience as ones that are wonderful, because you learn what you don't want. You learn what you never want to have happen again and how to navigate that. And also you need to take whatever this means to you. You need to study sociology and psychology. You need to understand how people think, how people work, because whether you want to or not, you're going to be a therapist. You're going to be navigating personality, I will say. You will navigate, especially, and it doesn't matter what level you're at, but the higher up the level is, the more unique the possibilities are that you're going to encounter some real characters. You can make mistakes and still work, but you've got to know how to handle people. And if you don't know how to do that, that's a skill I would say, no matter where you are in your career, you need to work on. And if you want to become an SM, start that now. Start analyzing how you interact with people. How do you deal with stress? How do you release stress? How do you handle other people's stress? And figure out how to navigate those waters. And then from there, I think you can learn either through a program or through your own hard work and dedication.
I totally agree with that. Adaptability across the board, whether it's people, whether it's conflict resolution, whether it's, you know, some disaster going on during a rehearsal or a show, being able to, you know, pick up, it's one of the things that, like, I think an improv class is honestly really useful for, just having that, like, quick on your feet, like, what's the most effective tactic here? It's a lot of things that you can't learn in a classroom. And I think it's really helpful to start in a classroom, because any knowledge that you can learn from a theater professional, from someone who's been in those experiences, they're going to have stories that they'll be able to tell you, okay, this is what happened, this is what we did, this is how that ended up working out. And that information and that, like, those connections, mental connections, are so useful for the next time it happens to you. I find that, at least for me, burnout is really always on the edge. It's always there, kind of taunting you. And I think that's because, you know, the process of getting into a career in theater normally happens, you know, I used to watch theater as a kid. I fell in love with theater. I got into theater. Now I work theater, and I don't watch theater anymore. And that can kind of make people frustrated, and you don't get to see the magic anymore because you see all of the people, you know, working behind the scenes. So my biggest piece of advice always, and I try to adhere to this as much as I can, is watch theater.
With you mentioned when things go wrong and like the benefits of taking an improv class, it made me realize like, oh, it's so similar to an improv class in that you're taught in improv classes that the only wrong choice is making no choices and like freezing up. And when things go wrong on stage, what's really important is that you are the calm in the storm that is making a clear choice. If afterwards it's the wrong choice, cool, now we know better. But making that decision and being someone that's kind of driving the ship in moments of chaos is super important.
Yeah, I think jumping off of that, my biggest piece of advice is to have a good understanding of yourself, who you are, because in the beginning you're going to work, you know, whatever job you get, because you're trying to get out there and make money and get the experience and make the connections. But eventually you're going to move on to be at a point in your career where you have choices, where you get to, like, you have job opportunities, job offers, and you get to choose. And I think it's really important that people like have a good understanding of their morals and like who the type of people they want to work with, because you are not going to, if you have a specific set of morals and beliefs, you are not going to have a good time working at a theater that does not implement those same practices or completely disagrees with those same practices, especially in working with those people. So just having a good sense of self and like knowing your worth and knowing the type of theater that you want to create, regardless if you're touring or commercial or regional, you know, whatever, just understanding yourself and the type of theater that you want to make, and ensuring that you are able to continue to do that.
Right. Awesome. Well, does anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Take everything with a grain of salt, and take what you like and leave what you don't, because everybody's path is different. And for anybody who's watching this, your path is going to be different than all of our paths. And so you can take from our experiences and apply what you want to apply, but this is like by no means a like do these things. Like I'm not trying to tell people to do things, because everybody's path is going to be different.
The one thing I would say is it's important to set goals for yourself and have realistic and healthy goals. And it's good to have goals that are perhaps lofty. That's great. But the biggest thing is to not make a specific goal your only means of justification that you are successful, that you are worthy, that you have done something good. And for a lot of people, I hear them say, you know, well, the goal is I'm going to move to New York, and if I don't have a Broadway show in 3 years, I'm leaving and I'm never doing theater again. And I want to stop and remind them that if Broadway is your only justification for doing this and your only goal that you will find any fulfillment or satisfaction or personal value in, then maybe you should reevaluate for a minute, because the chances of that are there. I mean, it's obviously the most competitive and hardest job to get, number one, which is realistic. But also, if you're not doing it because you love it and because it's something you're passionate about, you're only doing it to get to an end result, your work is going to suffer, your relationships are going to suffer, and you're never going to find the joy that's going to continue to drive you forward in a career. So set your goals, set your desires, set your boundaries, but make sure that they are about you and not about something else defining you.
Never underestimate any opportunity that you may have. Some of the best experiences I've ever had are in the smaller theaters where we had a whiteboard that had like 12 dimmers. And with that, don't underestimate the people around you, you know, like make friends, talk to them, especially other stage managers. make friends, figure out what they do. What do you like about that? What do you don't like about that? What might you want to incorporate into how you operate?
The one thing that I would say, as like I guess a final piece of advice, is to whoever's watching this, to remember that theater is a collaborative art form. No one person on a production team in the cast is better than somebody else, and to just always remember to treat people with kindness and respect, because if you're there in a room to create a show, you were there for a purpose, and that's not going to happen without you, and that's not going to happen without every single person involved in that room. It's all teamwork, and it's all collaborative, and to just treat everybody really well, regardless of what show it is, where you are, if you're new, any of that. Just always remember to treat people with kindness and respect.
My stage management professor has her number one, not rule, but rule of stage management is be a good person. Then you're going to make the room a fun place to be, and you're going to potentially get more work simply because you are a good person.
And speaking of people that light up a room, thank you all so much for lighting up this Zoom room. You were saying earlier you can't do theater without everybody. This couldn't have happened without each and every one of you. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us and talk to whoever ends up watching this about your experiences and how we're all going to have different paths and how we all love what we do, which is so important. If you're watching this, tell me about your path down in the comments below. I want to hear everyone's different path. If there's 100 comments, I'm pretty sure it's going to be 100 completely different answers. So thank you so much for watching. My name is Kent, and this has been your half-hour call.
Question or an idea for a video? If you do, send me an email at askhalfhourcall@gmail.com. That's askhalfhourcall@gmail.com.